and I want to ask you about the so-called Aryan Invasion Theory. Can you tell us what it exactly is and who created it and why?
Well, first of all, let's just look at India's encounter with the West, going all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans. When the Greeks under Alexander came to India, they found a tradition of 153 kings going back more than 6,400 years. They found a vast civilization that awed them in many ways. Romans lost a lot of their gold and trade with India. So, and then of course, there was the understanding of India as a great civilizational force. We have terms like Indochina, Indonesia, Indian Ocean. And then Columbus was going to search for India. So there was this great appreciation of India as a vast civilization. So after the long history of respect for India, going all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans, the colonial era began. And in that period, the British felt the need to subordinate India. When they came to India, India's economy was much bigger than the British. India was the crown in the jewel. I should say the jewel in the crown. And so they started to downplay India. India is not a great civilization. India is primitive, backward, uneducated, poor. That need for colonial subordination, we need to convert them to Christianity. So what happened was, instead of looking upon India as a great civilization in its own right, they decided that we need to have India's civilization come from the West. And at the same time, it was discovered that there were various linguistic connections between Sanskrit and the languages of Europe. And there are only two possible conclusions for that. One, an influence from India to Europe, and two, an influence from Europe to India. In the colonial era, the influence from India to Europe was not desirable. That would subordinate Europe to India again, as in the past. So they came up with this idea that the languages migrated from Europe to India, and the Sanskrit and a lot of the other things that were regarded as great in India were borrowed or came from outside the country and had perhaps a European connection. And that is where they invented this term Arya for a group of white-skinned people coming into India from the northwest. Arya is a Sanskrit term for nobility, respect, culture. Very common not only among the ancient Vedic texts, but very common in Buddhist, Jain, and Indian literature overall. So it was a total distortion of this term, and it became aligned with different forms of German nationalism and European nationalism at various levels. So they proposed that these Aryans invaded or migrated into India, brought Sanskrit and other things, and entered into the country, and Indian civilization was borrowed from Central Asia or Europe. So that was the foundation of it. It was kind of assumed. And the first point that I want to raise is people always now ask the question, can we disprove the Aryan invasion migration? And what I would like to raise, first of all, is that so far it has no proof. How do you need to disprove something that hasn't proved itself? So there was this stereotype of these Aryan hordes coming in, destroying cities and bringing in their horses and chariots and weapons. And the first point I want to make very clear is there's absolutely no evidence for this at all. Archaeologically speaking, no one has ever found the invading Aryans. There are no Aryan skeletons. There are no Aryan encampments. There are no Aryans destroyed cities. Some of these things were proposed. They cannot be identified seriously in the archaeological record at all. And every place they have been proposed to be has not turned out to be true, whether it was the invasion of Mohenjo-Daro. So there is no evidence for them in archaeology, in genetics, in geology, and artifacts, in animals. There's no Aryan horses, there's no Aryan chariots. So first of all, we don't need to disprove, they need to prove, and so far they have no proof. Now, on the other hand, I can go into some detail as to what the contrary evidence is.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.